On this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, we look at some of the top news items from across the space over the past week and speak with Red Hat on the evolving storage needs for cloud infrastructure. Well, thanks for joining us on this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief at RCR Wireless News. On this week's show, we have a featured interview with Red Hat on the evolving storage needs for cloud infrastructure. But first, let's take a look at some of the top news items from across the telecom-related NFV, SDN, and cloud space over the past week. Well, Verizon this week claimed it recently completed the industry's largest known NFV OpenStack cloud deployment across 5 of its U.S. data centers. The telecom giant said the deployment created a production design based on a core and pod architecture that provides the hyperscale capabilities and flexibility necessary to meet the company's complex network requirements. Verizon said deployments are currently in progress across additional domestic data centers and aggregation sites, that it plans for international location deployments over the next several months, and expects the design adoption in edge network sites by the end of the year. The deployment included support from big switch networks, Dell and Red Hat, with claims the OpenStack pod-based design moving from concept to deployment of more than 50 racks in the 5 data centers in less than 9 months. The partners were said to have constructed and tested large-scale test beds mirroring the production design to validate resiliency at scale and leverage the open source community to deliver the NFV pod architecture. Also this week, a recent report from Technology Business Research found some early adopter telecom operators were moving forward with limited commercial launches of NFV and SDN technologies despite continuing questions around standards. The report noted these early launches were leveraging a mix of vendor solutions and internal resources ahead of industry adopted standards, with cost reduction and service agility seen as key drivers for initial deployments. TBR noted for carriers like AT&T, NFV and SDN are viewed as critical for long-term survival. In terms of integration models, TBR noted one approach is to build an end-to-end NFV stack leveraging products from several vendors. These deployments require tested, interoperable components to ensure carrier-grade delivery though adding further complexity, operators must decide which vendor, if any, integrates the stack. TBR highlighted NTT Docomo as one operator that is leveraging multiple vendors for its deployment, though working as its prime integrator. This path is seen as somewhat limited to carriers with enough expertise in the matter to handle their own integration. Other carriers are expected to use a single vendor for their full NFV stack, though TBR explained carriers should make sure such moves include solutions that comply with multi-vendor and open source standards to enable network integration. Well, for this week's featured interview, we spoke with Ranga Rangachari, who's the VP and GM for storage at Red Hat, to get his views on the evolving storage needs for the cloud infrastructure. Let's take a look at that interview now. Well, thanks for joining us this week. This week we're joined by Ranga Rangachari, who's the Vice President and General Manager for storage at Red Hat, to talk a bit about the virtualization, the storage space. So hey, Ranga, thanks so much for joining us this week. We appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
Great, no problem at all. Well, maybe start off with a little overview, maybe from yourself at Red Hat. Obviously, I think most people know who Red Hat is, but obviously you guys are a little more in a focused section there. So maybe a little overview on kind of what you guys do there at Red Hat, and at least in your part of the company there.
Yeah. So what my team or the storage team does is it's a very essential ingredient for our overall portfolio. So within the storage portfolio that we have, the business problem we're trying to help our customers solve is just the sheer explosion of unstructured data that's happening in enterprises, and also the movement to cloud. So the movement to cloud, along with just the sheer explosion of unstructured data, is really starting to test the limits and test the infrastructure that customers have been using so far. So what we offer our customers is truly an open software-defined storage set of solutions that allows them to scale out as and when their workload needs increase or decrease, in some cases, across physical environments, virtual environments, private cloud, and public cloud. So essentially, it's the same product, and we give our customers complete flexibility and complete degrees of freedom on where they want to deploy it, and enjoy the same benefits regardless of whether it's running in a physical environment, in a private cloud, or a public cloud environment.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, maybe talk a bit about. I know you kind of already discussed, the fact that there has been this huge explosion in storage needs for operators, and obviously cloud is one way to kind of handle this. I guess can you talk a bit about how that's evolved over the past couple of years? Because it does seem like that the market has really kind of taken this turn, at least for telecom operators, where it's just become such a data intensive and storage operations now. I mean, and again, for these operators, a lot of them have just kind of struggled to deal with that growth. I mean, I think everybody kind of knew it was going to happen, but I think no one realized the degree at which it would happen and how rapidly it seemed to have happened. I guess as you look at the market, how have you seen that evolution kind of change in terms of both the need for it and also how cloud has kind of impacted the storage and the data actually being transferred now?
Well, so, I think that's a great question, right? If you look back at the traditional, what I call the traditional storage mainframe, we call it internally, these are these big pieces of iron that telcos and others use. They were actually built fundamentally around what we call a scale-up architecture, which is kind of just keep adding more and more drives to it to hit the physical limits, right? And in the conversations with our customers a year ago, 2 years ago, was around tens of petabytes. Today, the conversation is hundreds of petabytes and exabytes of storage. And it's very tough for these organizations to not just comprehend the sheer magnitude of the storage, but also how do they rein in the growth without having to just completely blow their budgets out of the water, right? So it's both an economic challenge as well as a technology challenge. And through our open source approach, I think we give our customers not just the economic flexibility, but also the technical flexibility, which is it's completely open. So they can, move things around, move data from a private cloud to a public cloud without having to change their APIs, and a lot of bells and whistles. But the evolution that we've seen, I think, comes in 2 or 3 key flavors, right? One is just the movement to cloud. And cloud intrinsically, customers believe it just scales out almost infinitely, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a perception of, hey, just keep adding more and more stuff to it. And especially from a service provider standpoint, what people are, there's just a lot of audio, video, multimedia files that just take up tremendous amount of gigabytes, if not terabytes of storage. That's one. And the other is also what we're seeing is some of these service providers are forced to move from what we call an asset-heavy to an asset-light model, right? So that's why they're building their entire infrastructure on software-defined infrastructure, where the software compute, which is where OpenStack really comes in, software-defined storage, and software-defined networking. Yeah. It just gives them the ability to manage their expenses without having to compromise on their SLAs.
Got it. Now, I guess maybe touching on the SL aspect of this, I mean, is there a challenge in terms of a comfort level for operators? Because cloud is still perhaps somewhat new to kind of what they're working with, and obviously cloud storage maybe even more so. But I guess from a consumer or public cloud point of view, a consumer-facing one, maybe the SLA situation isn't as great as maybe an enterprise version might be. I mean, is there any challenge in trying to make sure that there's a significant comfort level for companies that are looking to kind of expand their use of cloud for storage? Because again, like you said, they have to do it because there's only so many buildings to store all these racks in. I mean, they don't want to keep doing that. So they have to go to cloud for this.
No, that's a great question, right? So I think the way I would distill it down is it's all about the workload, right? Because no two workloads are alike, whether you're running it as a service or whether it's for your internal consumers. And, there's obviously a lot of ways you can dissect this, but the way we think about this is workloads kind of come in 3 flavors. Some of them are very capacity centric, which is almost like archival, cheap and deep. I just want to pound as much storage into this physical box that I have. Then there's performance centric workloads, where this evolution, not the evolution, but the recent acceptance mainstream of SSDs and all flash, that's really starting to marry the power of SSDs and software-defined storage for performance-centric workloads. And the third is your classic latency, throughput-centric type of workloads. So, there is absolutely, I agree with you in that, it's not just that you can take any workload and move it into a cloud and you're going to see miracles happen. Because the way customers think about this is it's a very simple way. One of the guys told me is that we think of it as think big, start small, scale fast. Right. So the ability to say, look, this is where I want the architecture to look like 3-5 years down the road, but I want to start here. Right. And that here in an OpenStack instance can be, how do you actually use the Cinder interface that Ceph provides, our product, Red Hat Ceph Storage, and just start to store virtual machines and fire up virtual machines. And as and when you start to provide file services, you can use Manila. As you provide object services, you can use Swift or S3. So that's the way their journey starts. And then, as more and more in a multi-tenant environment for these cloud providers, as more and more customers start to use their services, the storage kind of scales out accordingly.
That makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. And it does seem like too that as you mentioned, kind of the OpenStack aspect of this as well. I'm guessing for operators there is that comfort level in terms of using OpenStack. I mean, I love operators I've talked to. When we talk about their virtualization movements, whether it's NFV and SDN, OpenStack is a big part of those conversations. So I'm guessing that's got to also help the fact that there is that comfort level from them, and so they have again, they're not kind of jumping into the deep end without a life preserver on this. They kind of have an idea what's happening.
You're absolutely right. In the OpenStack case, right? I mean, software-defined storage, there are multiple use cases and multiple workloads, but in this specific OpenStack case, one of the things that we see in the marketplace, and this has been borne out by a bunch of user surveys, I think the last OpenStack survey that was done at the last OpenStack Summit, 62% of OpenStack customers, people using OpenStack, were actually using Ceph storage as their storage underpinning, right? And so the de facto majority that Ceph enjoys in the OpenStack community is really helping customers understand you got to not only scale your compute, but you also have to scale out your storage, either independently or hyper-converged environment. It's more confined within the physical infrastructure that you present. But the ability for them to scale compute and storage independently of each other just gives them the comfort factor that they're not going to be confined to the physical limits of what the hardware can do.
Makes sense. And then I guess for yourself, and you kind of mentioned also earlier the fact that you guys do have this mindset of think big, start small, scale. I'm guessing for your own operations internally, I mean, that's got to be a big part of what you guys are doing just to make sure you're able to support what's coming down the road. Because I'm guessing, again, you guys see what's happening out there and know that you have to have the infrastructure, I guess if that's the right word for it, in place to support that. I'm guessing for your own internal operations, that's been a big process. It's just making sure you stay ahead of what's kind of coming down the road.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of the beauty or the value of the subscriptions that we sell, right? OpenStack or storage is, for a majority, it's just that, right? It's not about the product. It's everything that surrounds the product, which is enterprise readiness, which is scale testing, which is supportability, which is regression testing, everything that needs to happen. And especially the service providers and carrier grade guys, they absolutely need it, right? Because they're not just going to take something off the Wild West and start to deploy it. So they need companies like Red Hat behind it who are going to say, look, I'm going to build my infrastructure on top of your assets, and we are behind with them. So before we release a product, we go through, to your point, exactly the same level of testing that needs to happen. So the customers feel like, yep, this has gone through the paces that it needs to.
Yeah, I guess it kind of leads in. I mean, you kind of bring up the carrier grade aspect. I mean, that's always one thing I always hear from operators is, they have this legacy mindset of needing to have carrier grade out there all the time. And that's just kind of been how they've operated for years and years. And so that tends to kind of continue with the process. But as we move towards this virtualized world, I've heard people talk about, maybe carrier grade doesn't necessarily need to go away as a term, but it needs to be a bit adjusted to kind of this new environment. I mean, are you having to, I guess, also use that argument with operators, or I guess how does that work? Trying to meet those legacy carrier grade thoughts as opposed to maybe this new world we're in, where again that's not how things are anymore.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree. I think the term, right? It's the definition has changed.
Yeah.
But the term is still, the carriers want to be associated with higher levels of availability, higher levels of SLAs. And that's something they, regardless of what the underlying infrastructure looks like, they want to make sure that they provide availability and performance are kind of the two cornerstones, if you will, or the two pillars of how they want to start to differentiate themselves from the competitors, right? I think having an infrastructure that scales, having an infrastructure that performs, having an infrastructure that's highly available are all very key ingredients of how they actually provide these services to their customers.
Yeah, and again, the dynamic nature of what you're able to offer, and what all these cloud storage is able to offer, it does seem to play in really well with what, at least what I'm hearing from telecom operators now. They're trying to readjust their whole business models really to this new environment, and being able to, again, not have to, go out there and buy a bunch of storage that they might not need, hard box storage that they don't need. Being able to have an agreement with somebody that allows that scalability, and for the most part, I think we're all going to agree that the scalability part is mostly going to be going upwards. But still, they don't need to buy everything today. They can buy what they need today, and then kind of move it. It seems like that's been, I'm guessing, for you, a pretty easy selling point into telecom operators.
That absolutely is. I think this pay as you go or buy as you go model, where you don't have to lock in a bunch of capex in advance of 2 years worth of demand.
Yeah.
Contrasted with, I want to start here with 10 customers, and then I'll grow up to 100 customers and 1,000 customers. I was in India last week and meeting some of the large service providers there. And it's the same set of challenges. There, the other part of it is real estate is so expensive that they just don't want to go build out a huge data center farm and having in anticipation of demand. So they want to start somewhere and then give them the headroom. So as they grow, they can build a very predictable economic model. Now, how much does it cost me to provide a gigabyte of storage? Right? And how much does it cost me to provide a unit of compute? So the atomic level of how they measure, whether it's unit of compute or unit of storage, is what they want to be as linear as possible, right? They don't want to just go in and say, I got to start at $1 gazillion before I see any, first customer buy it.
Yeah, it makes sense. Are you seeing any sort of challenges in terms of interoperability issues, or any sort of, I don't want to say standards, because I think in the virtualized world, standards is maybe not the right word anymore, but I guess interoperability in terms of maybe what you're bringing to market, or what the general market is out there in terms of cloud storage, to what operators already have in their systems? Is there any sort of, again, I think open source might probably solve all of these for the most part, but are you seeing any challenges there, or what needs to be maybe worked on in terms of making sure that there's that continuity between what you're bringing to the market?
Yeah, so the whole notion of interoperability is something that the service providers really demand, because on one hand, right, they want their platform to be where all the workload runs, and they want to make migration as easy as possible, right? So for instance, the way I can talk to you about how we handle it within the storage space, right? So with our Red Hat Ceph storage and Red Hat Gluster storage product, it is completely from the ground up built on standards, either industry standards or de facto standards, right? So the file product that we have, Red Hat Gluster storage, supports NFS and CIFS, which are two leading protocols for Unix or Windows platform. So it is built on, the other cool thing with that specific product is, it is basically, you don't have to rewrite your program, because the API compatibility, the POSIX compatibility that we maintain, we see a lot of customers taking their on-prem workloads and moving it off-prem to a public cloud without having to rewrite the apps. On the OpenStack side of things, in addition to Swift, which is kind of the object storage for OpenStack, we also have support for S3, which today, for all practical purposes, Amazon's S3 has become, in a way, the de facto object storage. Yeah. And we just provide that out of the box. So that's one of the reasons, whether it's an end user customer or a service provider, they feel like having the standards-based approach not only allows them to participate, but also allows them to differentiate their offerings in other areas.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I was going to ask you about that, because I'm guessing that operators in general are going to be using multiple storage facilities, and so I'm guessing there has to be some way for those storage facilities to also speak with each other. But it sounds like, again, that there's some pretty good cooperation there amongst all the different storage vendors out there.
Especially if you use the industry protocol, it really shouldn't matter whether you're using Red Hat's products or anybody else's product, as long as you access files through CIFS or NFS or S3.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I guess maybe, kind of wrapping up a little bit, maybe looking forward. As you look forward in the market, it does seem like, as we mentioned, that at least in the telecom space, obviously the demand for this is not going to be going down at all. It's going to be increasing a lot going forward. Do you see any sort of any specific challenges or opportunities, perhaps, when it comes to maybe a focus on the telecom market, even maybe even more focused on maybe the mobile space in terms of what might need to kind of happen out there? I mean, do you need more support from the operators, the vendor community? I mean, what do you see as maybe being some challenges or opportunities for you guys and for the market going forward?
Yeah, it's not so much of a challenge. It's more the opportunities that we see, right? Which is, I think when we look at the operators, I think, the whole notion of NFV or network function virtualization, other things, just provides a tremendous opportunity, not just for them, but also for vendors such as ourselves, who can start to build, purpose-built functions in the network for a specific carrier or for a specific customer. So that's something that we view as a goodness for everyone, but it also allows the whole ecosystem to thrive. Because one of the things that we are seeing, especially as we get into this operators and mobile operators and others, is the need for an ecosystem, right? Everyone understands that, all the products don't come from a single vendor. So how do you really create a robust ecosystem that allows an operator to take as much guesswork out of the system as possible, so they have the confidence and the comfort that if I take vendor A's and vendor B's product as part of the ecosystem, they all work together. So that's, if you were to kind of look at it from 12, 18 months ago, that was one of the friction points. But I think that friction point is slowly starting to dissipate. And now it's just a matter of, how quickly can these operators scale?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that's a great, that interoperability and the ecosystem part of it. Again, from my conversations with operators, that you're right, that has been brought up mostly as kind of their biggest concern is, they want to make sure that, if they deploy something today, that if they get on board early on this, that they're able to making sure that's going to be, something they can use down the road as well. It does seem like a lot of operators maybe are getting a little out ahead of some of this. I mean, some of the really aggressive operators who are moving towards virtualization, maybe are kind of writing their own code at this point and hoping to share it at some point as well. But that does seem like kind of where we're at, is making sure that everybody is kind of on the same page, at least looking towards the same future for all this. That seems like that's going to be a big challenge for you guys.
And from our perspective, from Red Hat's perspective, I think it's in a way, we've seen this movie before with our operating system, right? With all the, I don't know how many ISV applications. So from day one, when we built the company, the power of the ecosystem was something that we felt, was not something you just earn, right? You got to work through it. You got to have the right ecosystem partners who can help, build the whole total solution. So for us, it's the same set of dynamics, if you will, but the landscape is a little bit different.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's a really good point about it. Yeah, it does seem like, and again, it seems like, at least from what I'm hearing, that there is some good cooperation there out in the ecosystem as well. I mean, obviously, some companies maybe a little less so than others, but for the most part, it seems like that there is, and especially with around the open source community. I mean, I was at an event last week, an open source event last week, and again, talking to everybody there, everybody is just so, when you don't get to the marketing level, when you get down to the engineering level, everybody is just so on board with making sure everything works together. They don't care about market share and things like that. They just want to make sure it all works. And so it seems like, at least from that point of view, it seems like it's progressing pretty well at that point.
Absolutely. And if vendors don't do it, the customers will force us to.
That is what's happening. You're right. It does seem like the operators are really driving this, and they are saying that. They're saying that, hey, if we need to drag some of these guys kicking and screaming, yeah, that's the way it's going to be. And so that's kind of progress. Yeah. Yeah, very good. Well, Ranga, definitely appreciate the insight on this today. Obviously, this is a interesting segment of the virtualization space. And again, some of the operators are moving aggressively towards, storage, like we said a million times already in this conversation, it's just growing and growing, and their needs are out there. And it's a whole new business model for operators and how they're operating and trying to adjust their focus away from the big racks of storage to kind of this cloud infrastructure. So interesting to watch it all play out, but we definitely appreciate the insight today on this.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Dan. Thank you for your time. Really
Great. That sounds good. And hopefully we'll talk again soon. But again, thanks for the time.
Thanks a lot.
All right.
Thanks. Bye.
Well, that'll do it for this week's show. Thanks again for watching. And make sure to check us out again next week when we are scheduled to speak with the TM Forum on connecting NFV islands.
NFV SDN Reality Check with Dan Meyer is a production of RCR TV. To suggest show topics or to reach Dan, you can find him on email, dmeyer@rcrwireless.com, and on Twitter @Meyer_Dan. For more Dan, news on NFV SDN and everything wireless, find your way over to rcrwireless.com.